Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tim Dalby-Welsh, and I'm a director consultant at Needhams 1834. A little background of myself: I was initially in the British Army, worked for 16 years there before leaving that, working shortly for a British charity, and then moving to Needhams to take on my position there. Needhams is a well-known in the UK crisis management and business continuity consultancy, and we have numerous clients across all types of sectors, working both in the UK, Europe, and the rest of the world. So that's a bit about myself and Needhams, and no sooner than we'll move on to the topic of today's talk, which is the secret of a successful crisis management and continuity plan. The aim then, I set myself, was to provide guidance to you as the delegates on the good and bad aspects of a crisis management and continuity plan. When looking at a crisis management or continuity plan, it's all in the name. I mean, there are many different terms that go out there, be it incident management plan, emergency response plan, crisis management plan, or the numerous other ones out there. The list goes on, but actually it doesn't really matter what the actual title is. From a definitions perspective, ISO 22301 looks at, calls it a documented procedures that guide the organization to respond, recover, resume, and restore to predefined levels of operation following a disruption. And the good practice guidelines talk of a documented collection of procedures, information that has been developed, compiled, and maintained in readiness for the use in an incident, and allows the organization to maintain and deliver its key products, both very similar. The fact is that when you're looking at developing your business or your crisis management or continuity plan, it's asking yourself, doing that sanity check and asking yourself, is this going to be useful in a time of a disruption? There are so many things that you can put in it, but actually when it boils down to it, when the alarm goes and you convene for the first time, is this useful to you as the team to get yourself through the incident and out the other side? The Dummy's Guide from Business Continuity, a set of plans to aid you in dealing with a disruption. Actually, a nice and simple description. So looking at some of the sort of negative sides from my perspective, looking at maybe the ugly plan. So it's not ergonomic, it's difficult to understand, it's difficult to find your way through the numerous sheets of paper to actually help you in that time of stress. It's full of jargon, lacks clear language, whatever that language is, but it's making it nice and simple, not using clever words to show how clever you are. It's cumbersome and hard to handle, probably measured in millimeters rather than actual useful content. And it does not make full use of tools of clarity. So, thinking about flowcharts, using bullet points instead of long-winded prose, and using color coding and other ways that help the user work his way through it in that time. There's probably too much content, and this is one of the big issues that I've picked up over the years, is trying to combine business continuity or crisis management policy into the plan, when actually the plan is there, as we've said, for dealing with the disruption. If it's explaining when you're going to do or the reasons why you're going to do things, and that should be pulled into a policy or standards document, stand alone and used for times as business as usual. And then containing mistakes. Avoid jargons and black art. Don't be your worst enemy. Show your cleverness through a good and concise plan rather than trying to use sort of cleverness during it, which is unhelpful. Examples here, BIA XX stipulates processes. You can read it yourself, but this is not helpful when actually the pressure's on. So what about the bad plan then? Well, you may have a very good plan at one point in time, but actually it's now out of date. Those key phone numbers that people rely on haven't been updated. The team members' names are out of date, and it very quickly loses the trust of the team that is trying to make the decisions, that actually if it's out of date, is it of any use to them, and then doesn't provide them with the support that they need. Maybe it's assumption based, all of its assumptions, rather than actually doing some sort of analysis to underpin it. It doesn't work with other policies and procedures. Thinking more broadly here of your information security policy, your HR policy, all of these need to be linked into this, because actually they're going to be you'll rely on them when using the continuity plan. And again, therefore, no linkage to maybe other plans, maybe your security plan, your fire evacuation plan. All of these need to be interlinked together and work in unison. It doesn't conform to sort of naturalistic decision making of a group expected to use it. And this is, I think, a big thing, is actually making sure that the plans link to the culture of your individual organizations. If you work for a scientific orientated organization, then actually they might like a very precise nature, convoluted type flowcharts, because that is the natural way that they understand things and solve problems. Whereas if you're working for a advertising company where you're much more blue sky thinking, then actually a less austere and less precise plan is something that supports that group of people much better. The gap between the plan and reality. And again, this bases down to actually needing to look at, what has built this plan, which we'll go on to, i.e. the BIAs, the analysis beforehand. And it doesn't consider all the phases of an incident. Think through, actually, how does an incident work? There's the initial response, there's continuity, and then there's recovery. And then also, finally, I think, misaligned to stakeholder requirements. Each of your companies is not working in isolation. It has suppliers, it has regulators, it has customers or clients, and all of those have specific requirements or expectations from you, and therefore making sure that those are covered in your response is critical. So summing it up, I think, what's bad and ugly? Well, millimeters, the depth and dust on it is either far too thick and can't be used, or the dust on it suggests that actually it's never been opened and never been updated. You probably identify that it's one of these if the fact is that during your exercise or incident, no one bothers to pick it up and they just go for natural decision making as a team rather than using it. It receives negative feedback, or your last audit didn't go well due to it, or probably if you've taken on, you struggle to understand it yourself. So what do I think, or what do we think is the good plan then? Well, some sort of quotes here from some of our clients of what they believe their sort of good plans are. So, our BC plans and responses should be elegant. So International Bank, read what you will into that. But from the BCI good practice guidelines, everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. And again, it's getting that balance, and only you and the team that will use it will know what levels of detail you really require. So other aspects of what I think makes a good plan. So it's clearly opposite to the bad and the ugly. It's current, you're updating it as and when your policy requires it, or as and when staff move. The assumptions, if you are using them, are validated and stated so they can be tested at the time of an incident. It's aligned to your procedures and policies, and more widely to wider policies that impact it. it links to those other plans then. So your evacuation plan, your evacuation plan, all feed into that, and your low-level operational response then has a natural fluency into the invocation of your crisis management or continuity plan. It aids decision-making rather than hinders it. It allows progress to be measured whilst you're responding. And the plan requires, can be achieved in reality. So, the facts and the information in there, the responses that you have are grounded in reality and have been thought through, have been planned in detail. It covers all the phases of a response, and it considers all those stakeholders' needs. So we talked about prerequisites and grounding the plan, and what do we need before we can actually start to develop our plans. Well, apart from the policy, which I didn't want to go into too much detail, but setting out what you're seeking to achieve, why and how and who's important to you, you then need to move on to the business impact analysis and doing that analysis. So it's identifying critically those key services and functions that support your organization's objectives. And this is one of the aspects I've noticed quite often, is that business impact analyses are often done bottom up. And there's that nature, that human nature, that actually makes every single function, be it HR, finance, or whatever, all believe that they are exceedingly critical. And they are, because they wouldn't exist in the business. But actually, it's driving into what is the raison d'etre of your particular business or industry, because actually it's identifying those that allows you to then follow through to identify, well, what actually are those activities that directly support the achievement of those overall business strategic objectives. So it's identifying then the critical activities across the different functional areas. It's then assessing the impact resulting from failure of those of each critical activity over time. And needing to do that, you need to set your impact matrix, those criteria that allow you to work out the different levels of when things become when you identify your maximum tolerable period of disruption, and therefore your critical time objective for each of those critical activities. By doing so, you'll then start to be able to rationalize what are the most critical activities over time versus those that you have more time to work through. Because actually, if you've got an RTO of a week plus or 2 weeks, then actually do need to spend money, resources and time trying to get that activity up and running as soon as possible. Focus in on those that are critical under time, and therefore your resources can be focused on that. And I think from seeing lots of, a number of companies, that actually you can make savings and show the value of business continuity to your organization through that professional look. And then I think sort of more widely then, although this can be somewhat of an evolution, but then looking at the constraints and dependencies. What are the dependencies internally and externally that the activity has? And also, what are the constraints? Are there regulatory constraints? Are there IT constraints that require it to actually operate or be back up and running earlier? And are those then becoming key stakeholders that need to be notified later on? Looking then at what we've discussed is of the the impact over time. So identifying from time zero the maximum tolerable period of disruption and setting that out, which then allows you to then look at your business recovery time objective, having that leeway of when it becomes unacceptable, and then working backwards to set a reasonable and achievable RTO. Once you've done that, then it's determining your BCM strategy, your solutions across people, premises, technology, information, equipment, and suppliers. It's looking at the strategies and tactics. So the strategies that you might implement in there that then will follow through to the plan. So diversification, probably looking at those, with RTOs measured in minutes and hours. replication with RTOs under a day, standby RTOs greater than a day, post-incident acquisition, or doing nothing, or subcontracting. But all of these allow you to then start to develop meaningful and effective solutions or recovery options. And then looking at those, the tactics that feed into that. So it's the people, skills and knowledge. Can you start to diversify that? Can you build up resilience within the skills and knowledges? With premises, looking at alternate buildings or facilities, if that's feasible. Resources, what IT, information, equipment and materials can you look to apply to this? And then suppliers, those products and services supplied by third parties that could aid you in your recovery later on. And it's documenting all of those strategies into meaningful plans, identifying those potential solutions to meet your RTOs of the critical activity, selecting those most appropriate and then implementing them, critically implementing those rather than just writing them down and leaving them. And then continuing reviewing on a timely basis to make sure that they still ring true, that there's not better options available for you. It may have been that all the company was sat on PCs connected into the offices, but actually now half the team has got remote access through laptops. Well, actually that starts to buy you out of requiring permanent seats in a disaster recovery site, and you can then start to look at those different options. It's then also looking at your business resilience and continuity framework. And this is critically what we're going to move on to in developing your plan, because actually, what is your structure? Who requires a plan? There's no one plan fits all. So actually, for your executive team, the strategic level, their priority then is to focus on reputation, revenue, major capital assets. It sets aims and objectives for business recovery. It's outward facing, it's dealing with the media, it's external strategic communication with major stakeholders, it's resolving major resource issues, and it's horizon scanning. So actually its plan looks much more different to then the tactical level, the crisis management, if you will, or the tactical level, whatever you call it. This is the real planning detail. So, managing those resources to achieve the strategic aim and objectives. Is planning the resource and coordinating recovery of critical activities. It ensures the effective communication liaison internally, but with some externals. It's resolving, escalating the bronze operational level resource issues, and it's assessing and managing risks. How bad can this get? What happens next? And then it plans and manages the return for a business. It's the tactical level, applying the tactics. And then finally, and I haven't often seen, there are companies take this as a level that quite often you won't see plans, but I see merit in large organizations in having it, but having then department or site specific plans. And these are the doers, these are the undertaking the task to recover the activities, escalating the resource constraints, communications, probably more internal and a very operational, low level external, liaison with emergency services and other responders, and then setting up, occupying and operating the business recovery site as appropriate. But as you can see, those three different levels that are espoused by the BCI and at work all require subtly different information in their plans if they're going to have them. And so one size doesn't always fit all. Actually, what we want, and this is probably a bit more explanation for the wider world, but what we want is a tactical aid memoir. The British Army has a booklet, as you can see in that picture. It's small, it's sharp, it can be carried and is designed to be carried on the person the whole time, but that provides bullet points for every eventuality. It's not there to open up when someone is under fire, but it's there that when there's something out in the ordinary, there is something to fall back on, and just check that you've considered everything that you should have considered when you have time. So think about then what might be the things that you need to have in your plan. So the structure and the contents. So linking to that good plan, think about, are we going to phase this? What is the way we want to set out how we see our approach to dealing with a situation? So our immediate response, maybe we'll have that with our invocation, our initial meeting. Stabilizing the situation or recovery, so considered response, supporting information that's going to help us then start to put in our business continuity activities in. And then, our final sort of business continuity phase of it. So looking at our strategies and what we need to do that we've worked out in the preparation work. Think about using flowcharts of the incident. Think about the context and culture of your organization. What fits best for your organization? As I've said, everyone's different. And make sure that it's user-friendly. So up front, a flowchart. It's a quick guide to what is required. The detail covered in the actually should be covered in the main plan. So it's short, sharp. Don't get drawn into excessive detail in a flowchart because it comes too big and too complicated. And keep it simple. An example on the right there, but very simple. So for a well-versed and well-trained team, it can look at the front cover and get on with much of the activity that's needed. Then referring back to the main plan if there are specific bits that it needs to cover. Think about setting out your standing intent and objectives. And what do we mean by this? Well, your intent and objectives as a standing product allows you to communicate that vision and overall direction nice and succinctly. It acts as guidance, a guidance point for everyone involved in managing the disruption in your business. And it conveys precise goals and authority or permissions to levels of management to take control of an incident or crisis, recover critical activities and protect the business. The example there for Winston Churchill, a very short one, fight on. But the point being here is that if you have this standing before the actual incident, then it allows the operational level, the tactical level, to start to conduct activities, to respond to it in a uniform way before maybe the strategic team has convened, has thought about it, and then amends maybe the intent or objectives or confirms that they're content with it. So examples of an intent. So a law firm here managing no access to a no access situation is minimize interruption to normal levels of operations and service for all stakeholders. Whereas a mining company has used just four key objectives. So people, environment, assets, and reputation. And those priorities underlie everything that they do in a response. So looking after their people, then the environment, then their assets, then their reputation. And that is marked on every single bit of business continuity or crisis management literature at the top of the page, therefore running through everything that they do. Thinking then about your invocation and how you're going to get said team up and ready. Think of when, how, who, and where they are going to operate. So think about escalation criteria. Seek to match those escalation criteria possibly with your BIA and risk assessment to have that uniform flow of those impact criteria. So insignificant, minor, moderate, major, and catastrophic, but then linking that above. So insignificant, just dealt with at functional level, at the operational level, no requirement. Actually, when it becomes a minor issue, the crisis management teams is informed that there's an issue, so they're prepared, but they don't actually convene. At moderate then, actually the crisis management team do invoke, and that's the first point they get together, but and they inform the strategic team to keep them informed because you've got a formal invocation going on. And then for major catastrophic, then you'd see the strategic team operating. Think about notification protocols then. So, you know, what are the key bullet points that are going to allow that team to, or the team that and the plan that associated with it are going, how they're going to get together. So think about, you know, how they're going to get together at business as usual, how they're going to get together critically out of hours, because actually you haven't got everyone in there, everyone's away, you don't have the offices available, and that is very much different of how they're going to get together than during the day. Think about then how they're going to communicate. So, you know, are they meeting face to face? Are they going to initially convene over the phone or through a WebEx, for instance? Think about who's going to give the authority to invoke. Is the full team able to make that decision, or is there going to be a core decision-making quorum of the chair and a couple of trusted others that would make that call and then invoke the team? Then think about, well, what is the team membership? Who's the primary team? Who, importantly, are the alternates if one of the primary teams is not available? Do you have their phone numbers in case you are not able to access email? Do you have their email? Do you have their home phone numbers? Are you going to consider the makeup of your team? Are you just going to have a core team and then a full team? So, you know, additional SMEs that come into it, or are you just going to have the full team, everyone there, and then depends on the problem, allow people to leave if they're not required? Think about roles and responsibilities during the incident. And this is not just, you know, HR and what their normal day job is. It's actually what is their role during a crisis. So accounting for staff and HR's side of bailiwick, or if you have finance and what their specific tasks would be during a crisis. Think about also then finally, what are the locations that people are going to go to? What is their primary meeting location? Is that going to be the boardroom built office inside your establishment? What is the alternate going to be if the fire alarm goes and you lose access to the building? Think through that, get that agreed and get that known. Then think about up front or as an annex, the meeting agenda. And this is something we recommend to all of our clients. It supports timely decision making because actually you've got a group of people, not all of them will interact all the time during the day, but as you all know, if you go out for a staff party with lots of people trying to make a decision, it becomes quite difficult. By using a meeting agenda, you you prescribe specific time for people to operate. You assign roles, allow the team chair to govern the meeting, and then give specific periods for when people can speak up, provide their advice or their thoughts on the issue, and then pass it on to the next person, and allowing you to keep your meetings into a manageable 20 to 30 minutes rather than finding yourself still sat there an hour later with no decisions being made and no activity being carried out. Think about also then early on is, do you have some initial considerations? And this is the point I brought up about, you know, having bullet points. You don't want to have long bits of prose, but actually there might be key information that people just want to allow either check off that they've done it or confirm that they have got or it's relevant to them later on. This sort of example here where it allows people just to check off, yep, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, and then check it off before formally convening to look at the longer term problems. You can then look on longer term as you've gone through the initial incident response, then start to look at, do specific roles require recovery considerations? So does HR, does legal, do operations require specific considerations that are pertinent more to their specific role rather than to the team in general. You can then have listed those considerations, and you as business continuity coordinators or managers need to engage with those individuals and identify what is required, what do they need to consider, do they have specific actions that have recovery time objectives, and then allowing them to tick those off as completed. Consider also then your key stakeholder plan. There'll be your internal matrix of who needs to know what, but that would very much sit within the specific functional groups to inform their staff. You may wish to include, though, disaster response communications strategy. So if you've decided to have a single phone number that all staff will call, you may wish to annotate that in your plan as a reminder to the team that that is what needs to be started and enacted and then passed on to all staff. Most importantly, though, the outward-looking stakeholder plan. You know, who are your key stakeholders that you've identified from your BIA? Is it the regulator? Is it key suppliers? Is it customers? Do the work beforehand. So, you know, what needs to be communicated? What do they expect? What are the means that you're going to use to communicate with them during it? And who's responsible for those? Is it the strategic level, or is it actually at the tactical level? Who are the points of contact for those individual stakeholders that you would normally inform? And then, you know, any specific comments or anomalies that you might want to do. All of this can be done beforehand and allow you just to shave or cut time when you're actually responding to an issue early on. In the stakeholder and communication side of things, you may also wish to look at some sort of templated initial response. You'll all be aware how quickly you know, social media, Twitter, and those types of communications can get out there, from the point of a fire at a museum to someone taking a picture with their mobile phone before it's then on your local news channel and floating around the world. And so actually looking at a short communicating summary of saying that you're dealing with it, providing confidence with then gaps to allow you just to refine it to the specific incident, but getting something out there so that you're ahead of the game, or at least aligned with the wider communication situation that's going on outside. Now, those are just some of the sort of core bits that I think are the definites that you need to have there. But there might be other aspects or other bits of information that you as an organization may wish to have. That could be annotated into annexes because they're more useful that way, or it might be that you need to have them as part of the sort of wider contents of the plan, noting this, you know, keeping the thing as succinct as possible. So you may wish to include, you know, key continuity information. If that's not already in one of your you know, operational level plans, there might be, you know, how many seats you have at a recovery site and other sort of core information for that. Noting that, you know, if one individual who's normally responsible for it, the team may need to cover that out of the normal daily work. You may have specific contingency plans that you've identified from your risk assessment that actually, due to the severity, the impact, or the likelihood, you want, or your hierarchy has decided that they want specific plans to deal with them. You may wish to include end of crisis procedures, so lessons learned procedures. How are you going to formally end the response to a crisis, and how are you going to manage that? And there may be considerations that are required to be put in that. You may wish to include decision-making tools. So do you use information, issues, and actions worksheets as part of your crisis management or response team? Do you have templates that you wish to put up there? Do you use timelines to help guide your decision-making when the team convenes? You may also have casualty tracking boards for HR. You may wish to include your logging sheets, so your support staff for your continuity teams, your crisis management team can pull them out. And you may wish to include, in the battle box, the contents of what the battle box is, where the locations of the battle boxes and who's responsible for picking them up. The list is, almost endless, but again, I go back to, look at it. What do you need, you as a team, as an organization, need to have to hand that's going to make your life quicker and allow you to make quicker and more timely decisions during the complexity of a crisis. So finally, what for me do I think is the actual secret, as this is in the title that I was given? I think the secret for me is not just what goes into your business continuity team. It's actually the point here about the train team. You might have a plan and then a train team, and actually you're able to deal with the immediate loss much more quickly. But actually, if you've got an untrained team, then that's going to delay your response, and your cost is going to be of poor training. Actually, by not having a hot plan and a trained team, it's going to be a cost of poor planning. And actually, by not having a plan nor a trained team, then actually you're heading more for disaster. So actually, what's really critical for me is the validation and training of your plans through training, and actually the training of your teams. You can see on the right there, Usain Bolt wasn't a 3 times Olympic champion by sitting down and eating ice creams. He trained hard to become the world champion that he was. So actually, from the perspective is validating your plans, using thinking imaginative how you're going to do that, using workshop exercises with team members to work through the different strategies that you develop, to check that they work, to check that they're as foolproof as they can be. Talk through exercises may also support. Making sure that you do staff awareness, communicating the strategies and the aspects of your plan to all staff, not just the teams. What is the lowest or one of the machine operators at the end of the line? What is their role during a crisis? What is their understanding of the plans in place, and what do they need to do? How do they initially deal with something? Who do they report it to? When should they report it to? And where do they need to be if they are evacuated? And then looking at the team competence. These are the group that may not often will operate together, and so actually getting those as a functioning, capable team. Most of them are there because they are they understand their jobs well and actually know the business, but actually it's harnessing all that information into an effective group that at the time of a crisis can get together, look at the problem and deal with it using the supporting work and planning that you as a business continuity team and the wider organization has done. So training them in the procedures of crisis management, of exercising them through different scenarios, and that also indirectly then helps validate and helps test the plans that you put in place through looking at different scenarios that you might face. And then importantly then learning from those lessons. So writing post-training, post-incident, post-exercise reports, capturing those lessons and then implementing them back into the procedures, the strategies that you developed, and the plan, and the shape of the plan and how that operates for it. So it's not just the plan, the written sheets of paper and the endless hours that you put into it. It's actually then, those core people using it and being capable of using that and getting your business out of the issue. And that is me done.
Thank you, Tim. Before we continue with the question and answer session, I would like to inform all the attendees that PCB provides training and certification services for ISO 22301, Introduction, Foundation, Lead Implementer, and Lead Auditor. This training is designed to provide you with the required knowledge on how to continue to operate effectively with a short period. A PCB certificate is recognized worldwide. For more information, please visit our website pcb.com/training. We will now proceed with the question. And the first question is, I noted that some institutions say their BCP is elegant. Are there specific attributes of an elegant business continuity plan?
Yeah, I think that the specific quote was someone that liked elegance in his life. I think what he was trying to drive at there when he was talking about his plan being elegant, I think that is not that his plans are not unwieldy. And it goes back to my point about, you know, being sure of the size and how much paperwork that the document is. If it doesn't flow nicely, if it doesn't flow the follow the flow of how you see your response to an incident working. So when you open the front page, it takes you through how the team's going to invoke, of how it's then going to initially convene, where it's going to convene, who's going to be convening, what are your initial considerations, and then leading you through that, leading you through the incident, rather than having endless bits of policy written into the front, of then jumping from the team membership to suddenly going into talking about team training and when and where you'll be doing team training. Team training is something that is important, as I said, but it doesn't need to be covered in your crisis management or continuity plan. That needs to sit in your policy and standards paperwork or outside. That is a business as usual training activity, not a crisis or incident response activity. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Tim. Another question is, can you describe shortly what is the difference between crisis management and business continuity management? Are they different at all?
I think they are, from a perspective of ISO standards. There is separate standards that talk about crisis management, and then there's business continuity. We very much sort of see the things being inextricably linked, in that if you have a business continuity issue, you require a team to come together to look at that issue, to decide on problems or decide how you're going to solve the problem, to allow yourself to get back up and running the business continuity aspect of it. That coming together and that of the team, and that response of the team, and the wider issues that one cannot always plan against, is the crisis management. So we see the plans being one plan most of the time, but that again does not always need to be the case. There are plenty of clients that sort of have a crisis management plan, that is the initial response plan of how they will deal with it. If there is a continuity issue, then they have a secondary plan that helps or that captures the continuity planning that they have in it. It is always, there is, I don't think, and this is probably not what you wanted, a right or wrong answer. We as consultants look to have one simple plan, one simple way of doing it, but companies have different ways of how they would like to do it, and some will have two different plans, a crisis management plan and a continuity plan.
Thank you. Another question is, does security department have part to play in business continuity plan development?
I think that yes, the security department very much has a plan to play in business continuity and crisis management. For most businesses, the security team is there. It is the manpower at the front end that is dealing with some of those sort of more critical or life-threatening types of issues. So be that, sort of fire or terrorism or whatever. So they will have low-level security response plans that they need to enact. And that was the bit I talked about of making sure that your continuity plan links to other risk type plans in there. So if there's specific things that the security teams are seeking to do, that needs to link into the broader tactical plan from it. Likewise, when looking at the continuity of it, what is the security's job if you've had to move from your current location to your assembly area, to then from your assembly area to your disaster recovery site? How are they playing a part in that? How are they supporting that? And how is probably the security lead sitting on a crisis management team advising on the security issues?
What is the basic reference for RTO and MTPD?
The reference of where they come from?
Yes.
You'll get it on the Business Continuity Best Practice Guide 2013. BCI, Business Continuity Institute Best Practice Guide 2013. If you Google that, you'll find it.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Due to lack of time, we will read only one more question, and the other questions there will be answered by you via email. And the last question is, what do you think about the increase of the continuity culture inside the company? Because maybe you can have all the plan tested, documented, updating, but if your employees do not believe in that, maybe you don't have a team at all.
I think you've done all from the question, just so I understand it. So you have all the plans in place, but is it a lack of trust, or is it a lack of understanding? I think if you take a lack of trust, then I think that one of the best ways, and with business continuity, you need leadership buy-in. So that needs to be bought in, and I think leadership buy-in can be shown to the wider staff by their attendance at training, at staff awareness, and by them showing that they find it important and that they trust in it, then that should flow through to the wider staff. If it's a lack of understanding, it goes back to you or having resources or doing or carrying out staff awareness on a regular basis. This is not just to the continuity teams. This is staff awareness to everyone in the company. On certainly annually. If you can do more, then great. But generally, it's about once a year, and that's explaining to them what are the measures in place. So not every infinite detail, but it's taking them through. What would happen if you lost the building? What happens to you? Where do you go as part of your evacuation plan? If you lose the building, then this is what you could see. So you'll end up going to, and taking them through the different phases of a crisis and what they would expect, what would be required of them, so they have a full understanding of what they need to do, and therefore, and also, as I said, if they identify an issue, who they need to report it to, so it can be escalated up the proper chain. Okay.
Okay, once again, thank you, Tim, for this excellent presentation. And I want to thank all the attendees as well who have joined us today. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. In the upcoming days, we will send you the recorded link, which will be uploaded on our official YouTube channel and in our website, pecb.com. On behalf of PCB and team, thank you for joining us.